Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom, where we probe the inner workings of health with the precision of a microscope and the curiosity of a cat. I'm Ethan, your resident champion of obvious questions and understated wit.
And I'm Ilara, the quick-witted comedic commentator who can't resist turning every medical statistic into a punchline. We're thrilled to have you all here today for an enlightening discussion on chemicals, chronic diseases, and what on earth is going on with our kids' health these days.
Today we'll be diving into some startling research on how environmental exposures, especially synthetic chemicals, are implicated in the rise of chronic diseases among children. No pressure, of course. Just the entire health of the next generation at stake.
Right. Nothing like a little existential dread to spice up your morning coffee. But in all seriousness, we want to break this down into bite-sized chunks that won't make you fling your phone across the room in despair. We'll talk about how these chemicals we meet in everyday life are causing a surge in diseases we'd traditionally think of as adult problems.
So, if you were hoping for a laid-back conversation about how kids should just eat their veggies and be fine, you've come to the wrong place. Turns out, even that broccoli might be dancing with a sidekick of microplastics, just as a cameo, of course.
The cameo we never asked for. But let's start by taking stock of the big picture. Chronic diseases in kids are on the rise. We're talking increased childhood cancers, asthma, obesity, diabetes. Even certain neurodevelopmental disorders like autism and ADHD seem to be spiking.
The numbers are sobering. Childhood cancer's up about 35% from 50 years ago. 1 in 6 children has a neurodevelopmental disorder of some kind. 1 in 36 is on the autism spectrum. And we're not just pulling these numbers out of a hat. These are well-documented shifts.
It's like watching a sequel to a movie we never wanted. Chronic diseases, the next generation. Only it's not a Hollywood blockbuster, and there's definitely no popcorn.
Now researchers point the finger at synthetic chemicals, some 350,000 manufactured substances spread across the planet. Production has skyrocketed since the 1950s, yet we've tested fewer than 20% for toxicity. That's like inviting 350,000 strangers to your house and politely neglecting to see if any of them might be carrying a chainsaw.
Excuse me, sir, we don't know your name, background, or possible hazards, but sure, feel free to move in. Make yourself comfortable.
Exactly. It's regulation gone wild, or more accurately, regulation going on a permanent coffee break. Because under current laws like the Toxic Substances Control Act, chemical manufacturers aren't even required to prove a product is safe before it hits the shelves.
It's the innocent until proven guilty approach, except it's not some petty theft case. It's about molecules that can disrupt a child's development. Seems just a tad riskier if you ask me.
A child's body is more vulnerable than ours, for the simple reason that they're still growing. Their systems are immature. They also eat and drink more per pound than we do, so whatever is in their food or environment hits them at a higher dose.
Like the kid's meal that ironically packs a bigger toxic punch. Here, little Timmy, have a hamburger and a side of endocrine disruptors.
It's comedic to think about, but darkly so. Because these issues are serious, we see neurodevelopmental disorders, reproductive problems, and even an uptick in male reproductive birth defects. You combine that with the fact that many chemicals hide in everything from plastics to carpeting, and you've got a perfect storm.
Perfect storm might be the nicest way to describe it. The NEJM, New England Journal of Medicine, study even highlighted how children suffer these knock-on effects well into adulthood. If you get asthma at 8, you're not likely to outgrow it overnight. And who's to say what other issues might crop up in their 20s or 30s, all traced back to infancy exposures?
There's precedence for that. Remember the tragedy in Minamata, Japan? Mercury in fish, pregnant women ate it. Babies ended up with severe neurological damage. Or diethylstilbestrol, DES, which left mothers healthy but led to cancer in their daughters. Thalidomide caused limb defects in over 10,000 infants. All these events show that the womb is no fortress. Chemicals cross the placenta like it's a revolving door.
And if we learned our lesson back then, we'd see more caution now. But apparently, we're still fans of rolling that chemical dice. The difference is we no longer have 1 or 2 suspicious chemicals, but hundreds of thousands. They seep into every nook and cranny of everyday life.
Like plastic water bottles. If there's one thing we learned, it's that plastic is basically our modern-day confetti. Just throw it everywhere.
We're blowing microplastic confetti across the globe. Meanwhile, the environment is throwing up its hands like, I did not sign up for this party.
The problem is so pervasive that we see contamination even in remote corners of the planet. So, thinking you're safe in a cute cabin in the middle of nowhere might be wishful thinking. These chemicals have a passport that never expires.
Hardly the best traveling companions. And while regulation lags, children keep encountering these substances through toys, packaging, household cleaners, personal care products. Even the foam on their furniture can harbor flame retardants linked to decreased IQ, because apparently, a seat cushion can double as a stealth tutor, just in the wrong direction.
If only that cushion taught math instead. But yes, flame retardants, pesticides, phthalates, heavy metals, you name it. They're building up in kids' bodies before we even realize we should be worried.
Right. By the time a critical mass of evidence convinces regulators, an entire generation may have been exposed. That's not the kind of track record I'd want if I were a policymaker. But hey, I guess the check's still clearing for the chemical companies.
This leads to that uneasy intersection of corporate interests and public health. Chemical makers rake in profits, face minimal oversight, and rarely see their products banned. Meanwhile, the rest of us hope our children don't develop asthma or a learning disability.
Let's talk about real-world examples, like leaded gasoline. The second we realized lead was basically turning kids' brains into developmental minefield Ds, we phased it out. And lo and behold, children's average IQs improved, blood lead levels dropped. It's basically the textbook example of regulation done right, though it took decades to happen.
Indeed, it was a success, but also a cautionary tale about how slow we are to take action. Because those kids who grew up with lead exposure still had to cope with the after effects well into adulthood.
Now, as individuals, we can reduce exposure in small ways, replacing plastics with stainless steel or glass, opting for low or no VOC paint, using fragrance-free detergents. But that's like bailing water out of a sinking ship with a tablespoon.
Precisely. We also need bigger reforms. The New England Journal of Medicine paper underscores that a fundamental shift in chemical regulation is crucial. The system can't rely on the public to prove harm. It should be on the manufacturers to demonstrate safety up front.
Which is basically so logical that it's borderline suspicious we haven't adopted it. Hello, I'd like to sell you a mystery substance for your children's bottles and toys. I promise you it's harmless, but no, I will not be providing any proof.
It's reminiscent of the used car salesman scenario. Trust me, this baby runs great. Meanwhile, the car's engine is in pieces, but chemicals are intangible, less visible, so it's easier for them to slip by unnoticed.
Indeed. Also, modern laws generally assess chemicals one at a time, ignoring the fact we live in a daily chemical soup. No one is exposed to just phthalates or just flame retardants in isolation.
Right? It's a potluck dinner you never agreed to attend. Meanwhile, the potluck's main course is a side of unknown synergy.
Let's highlight, too, the cost factor. Chronic diseases in children aren't just about physical suffering. There's emotional, educational, and financial strain on families. And much of that burden could be avoided if we took meaningful steps to reduce exposures.
Exactly. As a society, we pay. Meanwhile, companies keep selling products. It doesn't add up, except on their balance sheets. So, part of what the New England Journal of Medicine paper suggests is that we, as parents and citizens, can demand safer products, ask companies about what's in them, look for those that practice chemical footprint reporting.
Because at the end of the day, businesses do respond to consumer demand. If enough people say, "No, thanks, I don't want phthalates in my shampoo," they might eventually figure out how to make a shampoo that doesn't double as an endocrine disruptor, and they might start caring if their sales drop.
Additionally, building awareness in our communities and among local representatives can spark change. We can support organizations that push for more robust chemical policies, or even run for office ourselves if we're feeling extra brave.
Brave indeed. Can you imagine the campaign slogans? Vote for me, and I'll fight for fewer carcinogens in your toddler's pajamas. A bit long-winded, but hey, it's honest.
I've heard worse campaign slogans. Now, jokes aside, this is serious business. Children developing these illnesses will carry that burden for years. Changing laws can literally spare the next generation from a lifetime of health complications.
Yes, let's talk about the why behind the vulnerability. Childhood is a constant state of growth. Organs, brain, immune system, everything is in flux. If a chemical waltzes in during a critical development window, that can rewrite the script for the rest of that child's life.
Not exactly a cameo you want in your life story. Another piece is that kids have less ability to detox. Their enzymes and filtration systems aren't fully up to speed. So if you or I are exposed to a small amount of a chemical, we might process it better than a 5-year-old can.
And if we're dealing with chemicals that have cumulative effects, it's all the more reason to start controlling them from day one. Or ideally, from day -9 months if you're planning a family.
That's why parents who learn about this sometimes feel overwhelmed. It can seem like everything is toxic. But I think the key is to remember that collective action matters. If you can't do everything, do something. Swap plastic containers, ventilate your home with fresh air, choose safer household items when possible.
Right? Do what you can, and also add your voice to the chorus calling for real change. Talk to your elected officials. Make noise about the fact that 350,000 chemicals float around, and we have minimal data on most of them. It's like we let the entire cast of a science fiction saga move in rent-free.
And speaking of free, we're kind of giving them a free pass. The NEJM study basically says we need a total overhaul of how chemicals are introduced into the market.
They even recommend placing the burden of proof on manufacturers. It's like telling them, if you want to profit from these substances, you first need to prove you're not harming children. Not after the fact, before.
Sounds reasonable, but big chemical companies might disagree. It's not exactly easy or cheap to conduct thorough testing. But then again, it's way cheaper than the cost of a generation's worth of disease.
Indeed, it's about moral and social responsibility. If the tobacco industry is a cautionary tale, the chemical industry might be next in line. It's just that their web of products is far more complex, so it's trickier to trace blame to one chemical.
Precisely. And that's what the NEJM authors underscore. Because we're dealing with cocktails of chemicals, the approach must be broader. We can't wait for catastrophic events to ban a single substance. By then, the damage is done.
True enough. Let's not forget the example of lead. It was only after countless kids were harmed that we did something. And that was just one chemical. Now we have an army.
So the big takeaway? Chronic diseases in kids aren't appearing out of nowhere. They're partly fueled by massive unchecked chemical production. If we want healthier kids, we need to stop shrugging off the root cause.
Well said. And let's be real. No one's going to wave a magic wand and ban all chemicals tomorrow. But we can start by removing the worst offenders, promoting safer alternatives, and demanding better safety checks.
Exactly. Plus, we can keep ourselves informed, share knowledge with fellow parents, teachers, neighbors. The more people understand this issue, the more likely we'll see regulatory change.
Knowledge is power, after all. And if we're going to shape a better future for children, we need all the power we can get. This is more than just protecting one kid's sippy cup. It's about the world they'll inherit.
So that's our deep dive into Dr. Mercola's perspective on these mounting childhood diseases and their links to synthetic chemicals. A heavy topic, but hopefully we kept the mood from plunging into total despair.
I'd say we kept it afloat, maybe even buoyant, with a few comedic lifeboats. Because if we can't laugh, how will we keep ourselves motivated to push for change?
Indeed. So, friends, let's wrap up with a reminder that you're not powerless here. Small steps at home can make a difference, and bigger steps in policy can make a world of difference.
Thank you for joining us on Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep speaking up, and watch out for suspicious chemicals lurking in your shampoo aisle.
And remember, the best wisdom starts at the cellular level. We'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.